My name is Suzanne Paul. I'm 30 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago what love looked like, I would have told you it was quiet loyalty, the kind that shows up consistently, that pays attention, that stands behind someone even when the rest of the world doesn't see their potential yet. I didn't understand back then that devotion like that can be sharpened into a weapon. I met Caleb Morrison at an open mic night tucked into the basement of a coffee shop that always smelled like burnt espresso and damp coats. The room was small and dim, filled with college kids, hopeful creatives, and locals who liked the idea of being artistic without having to try too hard. People clapped louder than necessary, not just for the performers, but for the dream that maybe someday someone would clap for them too. Caleb's name was called after a guy strumming an out-of-tune guitar and a woman whose spoken word piece involved a lot of shouting at the ceiling. Then Caleb stepped up. He wasn't flashy, he didn't raise his voice, he read his poem softly, like he was lending the audience something fragile and expected it back intact. He paused deliberately, his voice dipping at the end of lines, his hands barely moving, like even gestures might interrupt the words. I won't pretend I wasn't impressed. Afterward, I worked up the polite courage you only find when you really want to connect with someone and you're terrified of being brushed off. I told him his reading was good. He smiled like praise surprised him, tucked his hair back, eyes bright, and said he'd been writing for years, that he was just finally brave enough to share. That sentence should have come with a warning. Coffee turned into dinner, dinner turned into routine. Endless texts, late-night drives, laughing in parking lots like teenagers who didn't want the night to end. Caleb spoke about writing the way some people talk about faith, with reverence and certainty, like it was his calling. He worked part-time at a print shop, making about $30,000 a year. I worked in operations at a logistics company with steady pay, benefits, and real stability. I told myself the imbalance didn't matter. I thought it was romantic. I was grounded, he was the dreamer. I didn't realize how dangerous dreamers can be when they decide the world owes them applause. Caleb's notebooks were everywhere, coffee table, kitchen counter, car seat, like extensions of his body. But in all that time, I never actually saw him write. When I asked what he was working on, he gave vague answers. A new collection, a longer piece, something personal. If I asked to read anything, he shut it down quickly. It wasn't ready. This went on for 3 years. 3 years of sacred notebooks I wasn't allowed to touch. 3 years of him treating my curiosity like an intrusion. Sometimes I'd reach for one without thinking, and he'd snatch it back so sharply it made me flinch. Then he'd soften his tone, say it was personal, that he wasn't ready to share. I let it go, either because I loved him or because I loved the version of him I'd built in my head. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. It was quiet, candles in our living room, a small ring. He knelt and looked up at me like I was the answer to everything. I said yes. We kept the wedding small, close friends, twinkle lights, cheap champagne. I wanted it to feel intimate. Instead, it felt like an interview because that's when I really met his family. His mother, Linda, hugged me like she was inspecting fabric quality. Within minutes, she asked how much my car cost. No greeting, no welcome, just money. I thought I misheard her. She repeated herself louder. Caleb laughed it off like she was charming. His sister Rachel was worse, wrapping cruelty in sweetness. When I mentioned a modest honeymoon, she called it cute, like kids playing house. Caleb laughed. So did I, because sometimes laughing feels safer than admitting something hurts. His younger brother joked all night about Caleb marrying someone responsible. Everyone chuckled. I noticed they didn't speak to Caleb with respect, and they didn't speak to me like a person. They spoke to me like a resource. At the reception, Linda toasted Caleb for finally finding security. Not love, security. Rachel later asked me what I made, casually, like it was small talk. Caleb was across the room, oblivious. I told myself I was being sensitive, that families are weird, that it would settle. It didn't. 8 months into marriage, Caleb came home holding a folder like it was a golden ticket. He said he'd finished his collection, over 100 poems. He talked fast about a hybrid press, editing, design, marketing. Then he slid a page toward me. $17,000. He called it an investment. He asked me to believe in him, and I wanted to. I wanted to be the kind of partner who didn't flinch at dreams, so I transferred the money. I watched my savings drop. He promised I wouldn't regret it. For a while, he was consumed by the process. Calls with editors, obsessing over fonts, acting like he was commissioning a masterpiece. And for the first time, I felt hopeful. The book launched 6 months later, Fractured Light. The event was small. Caleb read, signed copies, smiled like someone who had finally been validated. I felt proud. That feeling lasted 2 weeks. After that, something shifted. He introduced himself as a published author everywhere. He updated his email signature. Then came the spending. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, a leather jacket that cost more than our groceries. When I finally said something, carefully, I reminded him we'd just spent $17,000. Maybe we should slow down a bit. He waved his hand at me without even looking up from his phone. "You're being financially controlling," he said. I blinked. What? "I deserve to celebrate my success," he replied, annoyed. "This book is an investment. It'll pay for itself." Except it wasn't. I checked the Amazon rankings out of curiosity. The book was sitting somewhere around 847,000. There were maybe 30 reviews, most of them from his family. Generic comments like, "So proud," and "Amazing work," the kind you write when you haven't actually read the book. Bookstore readings stopped after the first 2. The press stopped replying to his emails about marketing because there was nothing to market. The book was dead on arrival. Caleb refused to accept that. He blamed the press, blamed bookstores, blamed readers for being too stupid to appreciate real poetry. Never once did he consider that maybe the book just wasn't that good. And that's when the comments about me started. At first, they were subtle. He'd mention how Rachel's husband made 6 figures at a tech firm, how his brother Derek's girlfriend worked in finance and traveled internationally. Then he'd sigh and look at me like I disappointed him personally. "Must be nice," he'd say, "to have a partner with real ambition." The first time, I thought I misheard him. The second time, I asked what he meant. "Oh, nothing," he said quickly. "I'm just thinking out loud." I reminded him that my boring job paid the mortgage, paid the bills, paid for his $17,000 book. He rolled his eyes and walked away like I was embarrassing him. Then he started complaining about our house. It was a 3-bedroom place in a good neighborhood, not flashy but comfortable, a home I'd bought before we were married. Suddenly, it was too small, dated, not inspiring. His mother agreed, said Rachel had just upgraded to a 4-bedroom with a pool. Caleb sighed. Some people really know how to provide. I swallowed my response and told myself marriages had rough patches. Publicly, it got worse. When we were out with friends, he'd joke about me being uneducated, about how I was content with a small life while he dreamed bigger. People laughed awkwardly. I stood there smiling, wondering when my husband had become a stranger. Caleb stopped coming home on time. Family dinners turned into multiple nights a week. He'd come back smelling like wine, talking about how Rachel's life was goals, how Derek's girlfriend was living the dream. This wasn't a phase. This was who he'd always been. He just needed my money to feel confident enough to show it. 3 months into this slow erosion, his mother invited us to Sunday dinner. I should have said no. I should have stayed home. But I went because I was still trying to save something that had already rotted. That night would change everything. Sunday dinner at Linda's house was one of those rituals that came with invisible rules. You showed up on time, you complimented the food, you ignored the subtle digs and smiled through them like they were harmless jokes. I brought a bottle of wine. Caleb walked in like he owned the place. Dinner started normally enough. Linda's pot roast was dry, somehow both bland and over-seasoned at the same time. Rachel and her husband arrived late, keys to their luxury SUV tossed casually on the counter where everyone could see them. Derek brought his girlfriend, who spent 10 uninterrupted minutes talking about her recent trip to Barcelona. Caleb soaked it all in. I mostly stayed quiet. After dinner, Linda asked me to grab dessert plates from the kitchen. I welcomed the excuse to step away. I needed air, space to breathe without being compared, evaluated, or measured. The kitchen had a half wall that opened into the dining room. From where I stood, I could hear everything clearly. That's when I heard my husband say my name. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Caleb said, his voice low and irritated. "She's just so boring." I froze. "Well, you married her," Rachel replied. I could hear the smirk in her voice. "I know," Caleb sighed. "I thought she'd level up, that more ambitious, but no. Same job, same routine, same everything. It's suffocating." "At least she's stable," Linda said. There was a pause. My hands tightened around the plates. Rachel laughed. "Oh my God, Caleb." "It's true," he continued, almost relieved to finally say it. "Look at you, Rachel. Your husband's a real man. 6 figures, actual vacations. I should have waited. Instead, I settled." Derek chimed in. "You could always ride it out. You're young, published author now." Caleb chuckled. "Exactly. I'll stay until something better comes along. She's too predictable to notice." I stood there, heart pounding, listening to my husband plan my replacement like a business upgrade. When I walked back in, they all fell silent. Caleb kissed my cheek, smiled, told me he loved me. I smiled back. That night, something inside me went cold. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't confront him. I watched. I started paying attention. The money was the first thing that didn't add up. Caleb made $30,000 a year, but somehow had designer bags, new clothes every week, expensive dinners, constant spending. I checked our joint account, normal. Then I checked my personal savings, withdrawals, small at first, then bigger, all cash, all taken when I was at work. $7,000. 9 months. I felt sick. Then I found his laptop. His emails were still logged in. Folders, bookmarks, documents, side-by-side comparisons, another poet's work, notes in the margins, change wording to avoid detection. That's when I knew I wasn't married to an artist. I was married to a thief, and I was done being quiet. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. After that night at Linda's house, I moved through my days like an actress who had finally been given the full script. Every smile Caleb gave me felt rehearsed. Every kiss felt transactional. I stopped asking questions, not because I didn't care, but because I was listening. I started with the money. At first, I hoped I'd made a mistake, a transfer I'd forgotten, an automatic payment gone wrong. I sat on the couch with my laptop open, scrolling through my savings account history, telling myself not to panic. Then I saw the pattern. Cash withdrawals. Always cash. Always from ATMs nowhere near our neighborhood. Always on weekdays. Always during hours when I was in meetings, conferences, or out of town for work. 9 months. The amount started small, $100, $200, easy to miss, then $300, $500. Toward the end, a clean $1,000 at a time. When I added it all up, my hands started shaking. $7,000. $7,000 stolen from an account Caleb was supposed to have access to, an account I'd had since college, an account explicitly protected by the prenup he insisted on signing. I felt something inside me snap, not in anger but in clarity. This wasn't betrayal anymore. This was theft. I didn't say a word to Caleb. I acted normal. I laughed when he laughed. I nodded when he talked about book ideas that made my skin crawl. A few nights later, I couldn't find my laptop charger. I searched the apartment until I remembered Caleb had borrowed my laptop the previous week, claimed his was running slow. I found it in his creative space, the spare bedroom I wasn't supposed to enter without permission. The screen was still on. His email was still logged in.
I stood there for a long moment, hand hovering over the mouse, heart pounding, not with guilt, but with a quiet sense of inevitability. I opened the folders. At first, it was just emails from the press, editing notes, contracts, nothing alarming. Then I saw a folder labeled Research. Inside were dozens of booked poetry blogs. One name appeared over and over again, a woman named Madison Shaw. I clicked. Her poems were time-stamped from 3 to 5 years ago. Then I found another document, Poem Modifications, private side-by-side columns. Left, Madison Shaw's poems. Right, Caleb's minor changes, swapped words, altered endings, margin notes in his own handwriting. Change this word to avoid detection. Rephrase metaphor, too similar. Keep structure, adjust imagery. I felt physically ill. This wasn't inspiration, this wasn't coincidence. It was methodical, calculated. I took screenshots of everything, the documents, the bookmarks, the emails, the bank statements. I emailed them to myself, uploaded backups to the cloud, and stored them on a flash drive I hid in my work bag. When Caleb came home that night, he talked excitedly about meeting Rachel for lunch, about new boots he'd bought, about nothing important. I smiled, I listened. Inside, I was already dismantling his life. The next morning, I took a personal day. The first call I made was to Madison Shaw. I explained everything, attached the evidence. I expected skepticism, anger, silence. Instead, she replied within 2 hours. She'd suspected it months ago, had noticed similarities, but she didn't have proof or money for lawyers. Now she had both. We got on a call that afternoon. Madison was nothing like Caleb. She taught high school English, wrote poetry because she loved it. No ego, no performance, just quiet passion. I can't afford a legal fight, she said carefully. I can. I'll front the costs. We split any settlement, but more importantly, we expose him. There was a long pause.
Then she said, okay. I hired an intellectual property lawyer the same day, paid the retainer without flinching. When he reviewed the documents, his expression shifted from professional to impressed. This is one of the clearest plagiarism cases I've seen, he said. Then I showed him the bank statements. He leaned back in his chair. This changes things, he said slowly. This isn't just copyright infringement. This is fraud, theft, financial abuse. I nodded. Good. The cease and desist went out 2 days later. Copies sent to the press. Copies sent directly to Caleb with every piece of evidence attached. Plagiarism, side-by-side comparisons, theft documentation. I didn't warn him. I didn't prepare him. I let the ground drop out from under his feet. The press responded within 48 hours. They pulled Fractured Light from all distribution, issued a public statement disavowing the work. Online listings vanished overnight. They cut him loose so fast it was almost impressive. Caleb called me at work hysterical. They're saying I plagiarized, he said, voice cracking. They pulled the book. This is insane. That's weird, I said calmly. Where would they get that idea? I don't know, he cried. Can you come home? I need your help. I'm slimmed today, I replied. We'll talk tonight. I didn't go home. I met with a divorce lawyer instead. We'd been married less than 2 years. The prenup, again his idea, was airtight. Assets acquired before marriage stayed separate. The house was mine. My savings were mine. Retirement accounts untouched. He'd walk away with almost nothing. And with the theft, the lawyer added, you could pursue criminal charges if you wanted. Not yet, I said. Let's see how he handles the truth. I asked Caleb to meet me at a coffee shop the next morning. Public, neutral, controlled. He agreed instantly. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. No makeup, no confidence, sweatpants, hair unwashed. His hands shook as he sat down. He launched into excuses immediately. Madison was lying. The press overreacted. It was all a misunderstanding. I let him talk. Then I slid the folder across the table, 2 inches thick. Receipts, comparisons, bank statements. I watched his face drain of color as he flipped through it. These are Madison Shaw's poems, I said evenly, published years before yours. These are your versions. These are your notes. And this, I tapped the bank statements, is theft. He tried to accuse me of invading his privacy. I shut that down. It was my laptop, I said, and you left yourself logged in. He tried the subconscious influence excuse, creative overlap, accident. I didn't raise my voice. I told him the lawsuit was already filed, damages estimated between $30,000 and $40,000. His book gone, his reputation destroyed. Then I slid over the divorce papers, 30 days to vacate my house. He started begging. I didn't feel anything, and I hadn't even told him the worst part yet. Caleb's hands were shaking when he reached the last page of the divorce papers. "Where am I supposed to go?" he whispered. "Suzanne, we can fix this. Counseling, I'll do anything." I leaned back in my chair and studied him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the detached clarity you get when someone finally shows you exactly who they are. "Anything?" I asked quietly. His eyes flickered. "Yes." "Do you remember your mother's Sunday dinner?" I said. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. I told him everything, how I'd been in the kitchen holding dessert plates, how I'd heard him call me boring, disgusting, beneath him, how he joked about showering after touching me, how he'd openly planned to use me financially until something better came along. I watched his chest tighten as I repeated his words back to him calmly, precisely, without emotion. He tried to interrupt me, blamed the wine, said he didn't mean it, said his family poisoned his thinking. I didn't stop. I reminded him that his mother saw me standing there and said nothing, that Rachel laughed, that Derek agreed, that they'd all watched me fund his fake career while treating me like an inconvenience with a paycheck. "You didn't just betray me," I said. "You stole from me, you humiliated me, and you assumed I was too boring to ever fight back." He started crying then, real tears, not the performative kind he usually used. He reached for my hand. I pulled away. "You told me I disgusted you," I said, "so don't touch me." That's when I slid the final document across the table. The bank statements, every cash withdrawal, every date, every ATM location. 9 months, $7,000. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You accessed an account you weren't authorized to use. That's theft, fraud, potential felony charges." His knees visibly weakened. He gripped the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I could press charges," I said evenly. "I could have police waiting for you at your mother's house tonight." The cafe had gone quiet around us. People were staring. I didn't care. "But I'm not going to," I added. His head snapped up, eyes full of desperate hope. "This," I gestured vaguely between us, "the lawsuit, the divorce, your book being erased, everyone knowing you're a plagiarist and a thief. That's enough." I stood, gathering my things. "Every time someone Googles your name, this will come up. Every job application, every date, every family dinner. You'll live with it forever." I walked out without looking back. The fallout was fast and ugly. Caleb called his mother 17 times the first day, Rachel 8 times, Derek 5 times. I watched the call logs rack up before I canceled our shared phone plan that evening. Linda left me a voicemail the next day, accused me of being cruel, vindictive, heartless, talked about forgiveness and family values. I deleted it halfway through. The divorce finalized exactly 30 days later. Caleb signed because he couldn't afford a lawyer. He moved in with a friend, got kicked out 3 weeks later, and eventually ended up back at his mother's house, the same one where they'd spent years telling me I wasn't good enough. The plagiarism lawsuit settled 2 months later. Madison won. Caleb had to pay $32,000 in damages and legal fees. He set up a payment plan he'd be paying off for years. After lawyers took their cut and Madison and I split the remainder, I recovered about $11,000. Not all of it, but enough. Madison sent me a photo of her check with a message. "Using this to publish my real work. Thank you for believing me." Her poetry was beautiful, quiet, honest, nothing like his. For a while, life was peaceful. I got promoted, started dating again, reclaimed parts of myself I didn't realize I'd lost.
Then, one Monday night, 3 months later, Caleb showed up at my door. I had friends over, pizza, beer, laughter, real joy. He stood on my porch dressed like a regret montage, makeup, hair done, holding a folded piece of paper. He said he'd written me something. I didn't let him finish reading. When he read 3 lines of painfully bad poetry about broken wings and lighthouses, my friends burst into laughter. I didn't join them. I just looked at him and said, "That's what happens when you can't steal someone else's words." He cried. I closed the door, and that was it. No revenge fantasies, no screaming matches, no dramatic breakdowns, just consequences, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I finally chose me.